Hello there, Luciano Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers, one more live stream. Today is November the 24th, Sunday, and that's 3:30 Rio de Janeiro time. I'm not sure if we're going to have many viewers today because we are entering Thanksgiving week, very traditionally here at the firm. We don't see a lot of action in terms of new clients joining the firm. Of course, we do have new clients joining the firm pretty much every single day. But during this week, it is historically slower in terms of action coming, of course, from clients in the United States. And as you probably know, most of our clients and prospects, they come from the United States, and therefore, the heads up about things being a bit slower. But as usual, if you are in our live stream, you have a priority for suggesting topics of your interest regarding Brazil. If you have questions in general, I'm going to be pleased to answer these questions in general. If it is a legal topic, sometimes I cannot provide you an answer too direct because otherwise it could configure as a consultation. And as I already told you guys, bar associations, they don't usually allow you to provide free consultation. And therefore, I may address the subject to the best of my ability without actually configuring, legal advisory. So I see Sean. Welcome, Sean. Good to see you over here. Carlos Breathwaite. Welcome, Carlos. I think Carlos is new over here. You're pretty welcome, Carlos. Let us know if there is a topic of your interest to be discussed here in our live stream. And in the meantime, while you guys are still warming up, all right, I see Bill. Oi, seu Luciano, how are you feeling today? I'm feeling good, thank you. What's the weather like today? Would you like to know if there are places for herbs and teas? Right, so you're talking about, for you to drink? Tea and herbs, or like to buy, and grow by yourself, Bill. Let me know what is the, more specific question you asking. In terms of weather, nowadays, or today is being 75, which is interesting because I think, as Brazil transitions into, summer, or move towards summer, that's exactly the opposite in the United States. So maybe there is a point of convergence in terms of weather and temperature, right? But I guarantee, if we're talking about convergence in November, then of course, in late December or January, that's going to be exactly the opposite. Like in pretty much most of Brazil, weather is going to get pretty warm, and in the United States is going to get pretty cold. So very interesting. I remember there was a consultation. I'm not sure if there was this week or the past week, and the person was saying, well, and it was this person's first trip to Brazil, and she was assuming, or he was assuming that the weather would be pretty much the same. So he left. I don't recall if it was Europe or the United States to Brazil, and I think he picked something around July, if I'm not mistaken. So it was pretty cold, and it is pretty cold, particularly in the south of the country. A common consultation we have for both south of Brazil and actually the Portugal as a whole is that, for both countries, there are many areas in which people don't usually have, air conditioning and heating. So whenever I am discussing with our clients, and they are in the process of, picking a place, or, picking, it could be like a geographical location, or a rental. I always say, listen, never assume it's going to have air conditioning and heating. Don't assume it. You got to ask very specifically. Because again, both in Brazil and in Portugal, there are places in which people are not gonna have those things. It's not always a matter of financials. Like many people, they would rather refrain from using conditioned air because it's, of course, it's not as fresh as air that you're gonna have coming through the window, right? So not always a matter of financials, even though the financials may be also a factor into such a decision. All right, Bill. Glad to see you. Yes, to buy and for health and homeopathic reasons. Oh yeah, so that's pretty big in Brazil, Bill, and very interesting. There is a huge distinction. Okay, at least from my experience in the U.S., it's gonna be something. Let's say kind of regulated by the government. So I don't know, you go to vitamin shoppings, and sometimes you even buy at like this kind of markets that are more into natural stuff, like Sprout, right, and so on. And they may have some stuff like this, but in Brazil, Bill, like you're gonna actually buy that in what we called feira, all right, and feira is the Portuguese word for like I don't know, street markets, or the Sunday fairs, in which you have a bunch of vendors, like with sometimes they have small booths, sometimes they are just like by themselves selling stuff. And in Brazil, so most of the sellers of herbs and things that from nature for you to use, for health and homeopathic reasons, they are not regulated. So, it's pretty interesting. Like, you're going to see small plastic pouches with the name of the herb, like in a tag. But, it comes straight from nature. There is no processing. There is no upfront processing. And usually it's going to be much fresher than whatever you can get in the United States. And so if you are into those things, Bill, for certainly, you're going to be in a good place, and you're going to probably see, varieties far beyond of anything you can have in the United States. Okay, just like, of course, like we have the Amazon, and there is a lot of stuff coming from the Amazon, and I don't know, like there are literally hundreds of herbs and species that people are going to use for different purposes. There is a lot of what we call popular knowledge. I'm not sure if the translation is good, but that's how we address in Portuguese, meaning that's not something that's going to be coming from the, from a physician, or from, double-blind studies. It's coming just like from, mouth-to-mouth type of knowledge, and that's pretty common in Brazil, right? Like, and it's going to get even more popular and available as you go up north in Brazil, right? Like, so you're not going to find it, much in the south of the country, which has a more like an European kind of culture. As you progress north, like as you are in São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and it could be center west and northeast and north, like, and then this thing is going to become really big. Okay, but pretty interesting question, Bill, because it does connect with Brazil. Yes, there is also like vitamin stores, but they are not as popular as in the United States. In the United States, pretty common. You go to a mall, you're gonna see. I forgot. I think it's GNC. It's a vitamin store that you have in the United States. We don't have usually those things in Brazil. Usually what you're going to see if you go to a Brazilian mall, it does not matter in the south, like Rio de Janeiro, more like, in the south, but not as south as in Santa Catarina or Porto Alegre, but Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, what you're gonna see instead of vitamin stores, we call it like bodybuilding stores, in which most of the items are gonna be related, like to developing muscles, right? And then within those products, then yes, you're gonna find the vitamins, right? You're gonna find the vitamins. So, another interesting distinction, because I guess in the US, maybe it is like more common to have a vitamin store that happens to sell, like bodybuilding stuff. And in Brazil, it's the opposite. Like we have bodybuilding stores that happen to sell vitamins, okay? But those stores, like in Brazil, they don't sell, the herbs and this more homeopathic, oriented type of stuff. They're really separate, right? Like and there is no place in malls in Brazil to have this more homeopathic approach. It's going to be more like on the street market or fairs, street fairs type of thing that you're going to find those items. All right, we have M3. Welcome, M3. M3 says, good morning, afternoon to all. I will be staying in São Paulo for a few days in January. My apartment is in Jardim Paulista. Can you describe the area? Yeah, so Jardim Paulista is more like, a central location in São Paulo. Very interesting. Some of the most or the fanciest areas in São Paulo, they are not as central. They are more like in the outskirts of the city. And that's why I don't like it that much. Like, I don't like to be stuck, like for hours in traffic. So I usually, like the only time I'm going to be, like stuck in traffic in São Paulo is when I'm coming from the airport. I'm coming from the airport to downtown. That's where we have our office. And I'm usually around downtown. I'm always like, in those like not so fancy hotels, but still good hotels in the downtown area. And that's where I stay. I don't go far from the downtown, right? Like I would say I'm more a creature of habits. And even if we have closes in São Paulo, because, most of our real estate team is in São Paulo, I would rather for someone to go on behalf of the firm that, going myself to the outskirts of São Paulo. But I think Jardim Paulista is fairly well positioned, not far from, from downtown, and there are a bunch of interesting areas in Jardim Paulista. So very good selection of restaurants, of stores for stuff for you to buy, and you can also access easily other areas of São Paulo M3, and you're gonna be staying in January, right? São Paulo is not, tourist oriented, even though there are lots and lots of tourists in São Paulo. But a good thing for you, M3, like usually in January, that's one of the, main seasons for Brazilians to leave the city, right? So many Brazilians are going to travel, like for vacation with family, or if they are single, they're still going to travel with friends and so on. And they're usually going to do that between, of course, Christmas and the first 15 days of January, okay? Still, other people, they may be taking, like the second week of January as a vacation. But as a result, it means you're going to be able to kind of, visit different areas of São Paulo without facing, the peak traffic that we have in other months of the year. Good for you, M3. Good for you. Carlos is asking, can you help in getting a CPF number? So, Carlos, there are a few approaches for you to get a CPF number. I'm going to assume you are maybe abroad. And if you are abroad, the number one route for you to get the CPF is through a consulate. Brazilian consulates, as of today, they have a mandate to issue CPF numbers. You pay $0 or pay 0 cents in whatever currency you are in the country in which you are, Carlos, and you just need to schedule and go get the CPF with a Brazilian consulate. You could say, listen, I'm considering buying real estate property, and therefore I need a CPF. You just need to, put up with the scheduling system from the Brazilian consulate abroad in charge of a jurisdiction, and you could get it, right? A couple of other options when you are in Brazil is to, face or to get a really nice introduction to Brazilian red tape and bureaucracy, by trying to get the CPF. I say try to get because even though, like in theory, every single branch of Banco do Brasil, or the Bank of Brazil, the Brazilian Postal Service, and naturally the Brazilian Revenue Service, any branch should take care of you, like they have a mandate to do so. It's very often that they're going to say, oh, you know what, like we're not doing it. Like we're not doing it as we speak, or the system is down. They simply don't want to handle or, endure the pain of learning something that they don't do every time, right? So pretty common, and in the past we would say, yes, like you can go to those places, and then a prospect or a client, they would go there and get mad at us because they couldn't do it and say, well, why would you say they do it if they say they don't do it, right? So nowadays, we don't say they do it. We just tell you, you're going to have a nice introduction into Brazilian red tape and bureaucracy, and maybe you're going to get it. I see Carlos saying that you live in New York City. Carlos, there is, of course, I'm 100% sure you know about that, about the Brazilian consulate. One of the main Brazilian consulates in the U.S. is in New York City, in Manhattan, right? But just like I told you, it's a pain in the neck. You need to schedule, you need to enter into the system, you need to create a bunch of stuff. But that's my recommended route, right? Dee said, whenever someone buys a service with us, that would allow us to get to the CPF. But we don't get the CPF as a standalone service because we are not supposed to do that, right? Like when you see, the language from the Brazilian government in terms of a lawyer applying for a CPF on behalf of a client, it works like this. Listen, if you are assisting a Brazilian into some type of transaction in Brazil, right, you are allowed to apply on behalf of this Brazilian for a CPF. But we cannot do that just for the sake of getting you the CPF, right? So if you are retaining our services for something else, then guess what? Most of the time, we're not going to even charge you for getting a CPF, but you need to use a service, right? You can't just say, well, can I just pay you, like in the past before those changes up to, it was 2023, I think it was October of 2023, we would apply on your behalf. We would charge $275 US, and we would basically just get you the CPF, right? But after some changes in procedure and representation requirements, we are no longer doing it as a standalone service. All right, Carlos. But again, it wouldn't be much of a pain, particularly if you live in New York City, right? Like we have a bunch of clients who live far away from a Brazilian consulate. Not your case. Like you can just schedule and go get your CPF with the Brazilian consulate, Carlos. I hope that helps. All right. Do you still celebrate Thanksgiving on November the 28th? What you'll be doing? Yeah, no. So we don't have a Thanksgiving, Bill, right? We don't have Thanksgiving. So in general, that's pretty interesting, this question, right? Like we have, I'm doing extension studies in cross-border stuff, and this is in a online university in Brazil, in the state of Minas Gerais, and in this group, we have several students who are in the United States, right? Not surprisingly, it is like cross-border studies on a bunch of international law topics. And then I was surprised, right? That several, and not sure if by coincidence or not, but there were probably 4 students from the U.S. and they were all of them, they were women, right? In different states. There is one in New Jersey. There is one in Louisiana. There is another one in Florida. Like I remember 3 of them. I don't recall the fourth. But so they are in different states, and they've been in the United States. I know, like they've been in the United States for a while, because they are. I remember at least 2 of them. They have green cards, and they are addressing eventually the citizenship. So it looks like they've been for a few years in the United States, and there are classes scheduled for the 27th, which is Wednesday, and there was a professor like trying to schedule for Thursday, right? And then I said, well, we have those students, and they're in the West. I don't think we should schedule on the 28th because Thanksgiving is the number one holiday in the U.S. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I take from my experience in the U.S. So Brazilians in general, it looks like even those in the United States, they don't celebrate Thanksgiving because, whenever you get in the U.S. after a certain age, it's more like you already have like your beliefs, your traditions. And it looks like even in the United States, Bill, Brazilians are not going to really celebrate Thanksgiving, right? But that's such an interesting question because I was kind of telling, our professors at this extension studies, listen, we have actually 3 or 4 students who live in the U.S., and I think we shouldn't schedule stuff on the 28th because I would assume they are going to be celebrating Thanksgiving. But to my surprise, the other students, they never, answered. Like it was a WhatsApp group, with the students, and they never said anything like, yes, Luciano, you're right. Thank you for, speaking on our behalf. So what I take from the silence from the specific students is that they were not really, interested in celebrating, Thanksgiving, but very interesting, very interesting. All right, M3, thanks for the info. I look forward to visiting Brazil. M3, now I'm curious, like you said, for a few days, right? Are you coming to Brazil for a business, right? Because people don't usually come to Brazil for a few days, but I understand sometimes there are other constraints. I went to Japan, to Tokyo. It was back, I don't recall, I think it was back maybe 2014. It was my wife, she works in the language translation industry, and there was a congress, and she was going to participate. So we went over there, but we had a bunch of other commitments back then in Brazil, and we could not stay for long. So we stayed for 4 days, and it was it was a joy. It was a good thing that I could go. I got to go. I got to go to Tokyo, but on the other side, it was really a kind of really saddening that I couldn't stay more than 4 days. Right? So you go to the other side of the world. You travel. I don't recall if it was 14, 16 hour flight. And then I stayed for 4 days, and then I came back, right? Visiting Brazil, usually if you're coming from the United States, M3, of course, it's going to be between 7 to 10 hours, right? If you're coming from Florida, usually it's a 7-hour flight. If you're coming from New York or from Newark, it's going to be a 10-hour flight, but usually between 7 to 10. But still, it's a long trip to just stay for a few days. All right, M3, I will be in Rio for New Year's and then fly to São Paulo for a couple of... now I understand. So not just a few days in São Paulo, you're doing a combo. Really nice, M3, really nice. Carlos says yes, lives in New York City, so there you go, the 552. Good to see over here, the 552. Thanks for the live stream, Mr. Oliveira. Thank you for showing up, the 552. Thank you guys for participating. If you guys don't show up, not much of a reason for me to be over here. So I'm pretty happy to have your participation. Bill, as usual, looking after. Don't forget to click the like tab. Yes, if you guys can click the like tab, that helps with business. That helps with other people just like you to find our content. Thank you for the heads up, Bill. All right, any other topics of interest? In the meantime, I'm just going to address something that I see foreign citizens consistently getting wrong about legal services in Brazil, right? Like, I mean, a couple of things. The first thing is like, particular U.S. citizens for living in a country in which the legal profession is well developed. There are, a huge number of attorneys specializing in personal injury. And whenever you hear those ads from, personal injury lawyers, Mike the Hammer, John the Tiger, and so on, all of those crazy type of ads from a Brazilian perspective, right? And they some of them, they are always going to say, listen, I'm here, standing by, ready to take your call, right? And of course, is naturally always, they don't charge you anything up front because usually at the end of the case, they are going to keep, if successful, they are going to keep you between 35 to 40%. That's the usual bracket of compensation for, personal injury. And therefore, it creates a presumption that everybody is just waiting for your call, right? Like, I mean, all attorneys are going to be bending backwards to take your call, right? And that could not be further from reality, like in other systems, right? Like, so in Brazil, a personal injury does not work as it works in the United States, because in Brazil, in the United States, like in California, in Texas, pretty common for a personal injury or any other litigation case by the matter to be concluded in a couple of years, 3 years maximum. In Brazil, not uncommon for cases to take over 10 years to resolve, right? So if you think about the attorney, like the attorney is never going to work on a contingency basis for something that could easily take 10 years, and worse, that could not even result in a win, right? So therefore, in Brazil, there is no such a thing as people working on a contingency basis. And also, like, there are no people who are going to be taking your case just like, just because you have an interesting case. The reality is most of the good attorneys that I know, they are going to charge for the consultation just as mandated by, or just as required by the Brazilian Bar Association, right? And they are never going to work on a contingency basis, right? But so that's something I wanted to share because for any of you who happen to need an attorney, whether for immigration or for planning, for advisory, for buying a real estate property, or even if it comes to litigation, like, you should have this understanding about Brazil. And just because we are talking about the legal profession in Brazil, something very common as well is like a huge variation in terms of the professional fees you're gonna see being charged, right? Like, I mean, so like I had a consultation. It was like I think a week or a couple of weeks before, and this couple, they were saying, well, like, I mean, your fee, like for an all-inclusive real estate transaction along with the Viper visa was going to be $10,000, right? But I have someone else in Rio who's going to charge me literally like $2,000, right? And then I said, listen, in Brazil, there is a big variation, but the big variation is not only in terms of services, right? Like, I mean, professional services, they are never a commodity, right? Like each firm, each attorney is going to provide something different. So I understand, and if you are satisfied with this service provider for a couple of $1,000s, right, for something that we charge 10, by all means go and hire them, right? But if you want to work, with our firm, like, that's what we need to charge you to be able to provide the service that we do. Okay, and so many people understand that, and like, I mean, I'm pretty happy with the number of clients we have for real estate transactions. But that's something else for you guys to consider. Like services, they are not the same, right? Like, particularly in Brazil, legal services, very common. Like I see, and I'm not bad mouthing anyone, but I see is very often like, an attorney. Maybe they have a small shop, like they need the money. They're going to say, listen, I work for whatever you can pay. Okay, but that's because he needs the money. Like once he gets the money, guess what? Now you became a problem because, before you give your money, you were the solution, right? After you gave your money to the attorney, then you became a problem because now you're going to be requiring services that maybe this attorney cannot even provide because he already, working on other cases, maybe before because he's running around, trying to take care of, problems with his own office. So, just a heads up for you guys. All right, but enough about legal services. I see here, Rony Dio. Boa tarde, Rony. Rony is asking, would an online content creator who makes a profit from this be able to be considered for a digital nomad? Rony, so yes, that would be the case for both Brazil and Portugal. Now, Brazil, the problem I have with Brazil when it comes like to online content creators is that Brazil, the immigration analysts working on the applications, they are trying to they're trying to follow a pretty narrow checklist. Okay, and this checklist usually is going to have, a contract, okay, contract or proof of work. So if you are an online content creator who makes a profit, but if you don't have a paperwork, right, all you have, we had, I'm going to give an example, like there was someone from, that adult, and I think I mentioned that in another live stream, like we had a Japanese content creator for the adult content platform, like the super famous one. I forgot the name. I'm sure you guys are going to, jump in and help me remember the name of the platform. So she was making a boatload of money, right? She was making, I think, like $20,000 a month. She was, or she is, right? Like she's using our service as we speak for the digital nomad. She's making like $20,000 a month. And she said, but the only thing I have is like the contract that I can download from the website. And that's all I can present. Of course, like I don't have a contract. Like I'm not working for company ABC. And I'm just like, using the platform, producing content and getting my $20,000 a month, right? And then I told her, listen, this contract alone is not going to be helpful because the contract from this platform is not going to address the requirements that the Brazilian immigration is looking for. And I can tell you some of them, right? They want to see how much you're making per either hour or week or month or year. And of course, the platform is not going to have this type of metric. There is a language in the contract saying that you can work remotely. This one, yes, if you just interpret the contract with the platform by itself, maybe it does mention that, but they also ask for a signature on the contract, right? Like it cannot be just like an electronic contract. So there should be a person kind of vouching for the applicant, and there wasn't such a thing in the platform's contract, right? So what we end up doing for her, Ronnie, is that we told her, listen, don't you work for someone else? You don't need necessarily to present this situation to the Brazilian immigration. It could be anything that you do. And she said, well, I happen to do marketing for my mom's restaurant in Tokyo. Okay, at Tokyo again, look at that. And she said, and I said, all right, so if you do this work already, it would be just a matter of asking your mother to produce a contract to regulate something that you're already doing. And so she was doing like more social media and website. I think she used something like Wix to prepare a website for her mother's restaurant, and she was doing like social media basically, right? So her mother provided a contract basically matching whatever she was doing already, and of course she had more than enough money to satisfy the financial requirements, and there was enough for her to proceed with the digital nomad visa application, Ronnie. All right, so I hope that helps. Bill is chiming in. Great question, Ronnie. Indeed, that's a very common type of situation here at the firm, and I'm glad we can, help most of them. We have a Pedro ADSW. Welcome, Pedro. Welcome to the live stream. Pedro is saying, my Brazilian wife moved to the U.S. and doesn't work. Is she required to file tax return in Brazil? She doesn't have any income in Brazil, but we did transfer money to buy a lot in Brazil. So, Pedro, I cannot answer this specific question. Otherwise, it would work like a consultation, and we are precluded by the Brazilian Bar Association from providing free advisory, right? But I can tell you in general, like more like a few pieces of information on the taxation dynamic, right? Like so, whenever Brazilian citizens they are gonna leave the country. So again, I'm not answering your question directly. I apologize for that, but I'm gonna give you, some framework to think about. So in Brazil, like whenever Brazilians are leaving the country to live in another country for good, there is something called saída definitiva, okay, which would translate as like a tax exit filing, right? Like so, you need to give a notice. To the Brazilian government that you're no longer interested in living in Brazil, and therefore you are going to live elsewhere, and then this would work as turning off the taxation switch. Okay, this is pretty nice from the Brazilian perspective, right? Because it's not, the United States, if you're going to go live in Mars, if you're going to go live in another galaxy, Uncle Sam doesn't care. He says, you know what? You still need to pay me taxes, okay? Brazil is much nicer than Uncle Sam from this perspective, because Brazil, it does allow you to turn off the taxation switch. But I would say there are people out there who are not happy with that. So President Lula came up with a plan and said, well, if the United States can do it, we can do it as well. Let's tax Brazilians out there, right? But, just like most of the things that President Lula is trying to accomplish, he's not accomplishing. And I think it's fortunate, right? Like, the United States, it does provide such a robust protection, right? And representation for the U.S. citizens. I kind of get it, right? Like, to make this machine work is not cheap. And the United States does need to tax people elsewhere. Brazil does not. Brazil does not offer such any comparable level of protection and representation, and therefore leave those folks alone. All right, Pedro. So that's the tip, or the recommendation I have is for you, to maybe seek advisory from a tax attorney in Brazil, and they will probably better advise you on that. Like another nugget, another piece of info I'm gonna give you. Again, not addressing or answer your question specifically because I cannot do so, but I just gave you, a nice framework about taxation. Another perspective is like whenever you send the money to Brazil, like sending money, it doesn't trigger income tax, because sending money, of course, is not the same thing as income, right? Like, if you're sending the money that you have, you're just sending money that you have. It's not like income. And therefore, just sending money to Brazil, it does not trigger income tax, even though whenever you send money to Brazil, it does send a notice, an electronic notice to the Brazilian Revenue Service, and this, on turn, could trigger potentially an audit down the road, right? That's pretty rare, right? Like, I mean, I don't want you getting concerned with that. I'm not saying that to alarm you. Most of the time, nothing is going to happen, right? But again, whenever you send the money to Brazil, it's going to be associated naturally with the CPF, with the Brazilian tax ID for the recipient party. And therefore, let's say if the recipient is not filing anything, right? Or the recipient is filing that, the recipient filed for the tax exit. So that could, result in some type of inquiry by the Brazilian Taxation Service. But an inquiry, that's all it is, right? Like, I mean, it doesn't mean now you're going to need to pay a boatload of money. Of course, depending on the specifics, you may need to pay money, right? But what I'm trying to say is that just sending money to Brazil, it does not automatically translate into paying income tax. All right, Pedro, I hope that was helpful. The 552 has a follow-up question. Would hiring yourself through an LLC be acceptable, or would it cause you suspicions? The 552, we recommend that route. And again, I'm not reviewing your situation in specific. I'm not answering a legal question. I'm just explaining the framework for applying for the digital nomad. That happens all the time, right? Like, I mean, here at the firm, we have a ton of clients who, have their own companies. And our recommendation is going to be, listen, instead of trying to explain something to the Brazilian immigration, they have zero patience to understand nuances of your case. They have no interest to understand the nuances of your case, and they don't have time for it, right? Like, so they have a very straightforward checklist, and your job as an applicant is to help the analyst to check those boxes, right? You don't want to, make assumptions that they should understand your specifics. So here at the firm, what we do, we say, listen, if it's your firm, there is nothing wrong with this firm hiring you as, I don't know, like the general manager for the entity, the CEO, or, the director of whatever you want to be, right? Because it's your firm. So yes, you can have such a contract between the entity and yourself, and you don't want to have it to explain that you are the owner of the entity. All you need to do is to have someone at your entity who would sign on behalf of the entity. So whenever the analyst is going to look at the contract, they're just going to say, all right, I see company ABC is hiring 552, and that's it. And that's it. That's the contract, right? They are not, at least when you apply in Brazil, they are not going to ask like for papers, like the company formation, the operating agreement. They are not going to be asking for any of those things. They are not interested in knowing about your life. They are not interested in knowing that you are the owner. They just want to check the boxes. So the contract, you can meet this requirement pretty easily by just structuring this LLC, hiring you for a specific position, for a specific amount of money, right? And again, of course, if you are being hired and you are also signing on behalf of the entity, it is going to cause confusion, right? Like the analyst is going to say, what's going on here? I don't understand, right? So if you have someone else from the entity signing, then you should be good. I hope that makes sense, the 5G, but pretty good question. Pedro says, thank you for your explanation. Welcome, Pedro. You're pretty welcome. Let us know if you have other questions. I'm just curious, like you sent money. Did you buy a property in Brazil? Was it a good purchase? Are you happy with the purchase, Pedro? All right. Another topic here we have in our backlog, it has been whether to buy properties in Rio de Janeiro or or the Northeast, right? Like pretty common type of question. And as usual, it starts with it depends, right? It depends on whether. It depends on whether you want to have something more, cosmopolitan. If you want to live like in a big city like Rio de Janeiro, and then, of course, Rio de Janeiro is going to come with a higher price tag for pretty much everything, ranging, from the rents you're going to pay, to the cost of living, to going to a restaurant. Everything is going to be substantially different. Now, in the Northeast, you're going to have a more authentic experience when it comes, like, to beach town life. I think, like usually, just to give an example, right? If you're gonna have like, dining by the beach, like in a beachfront restaurant, right? Like, I mean, in let's say in Fortaleza, you could have, this done for, let's say, 100 to 200 reais. Okay, 100 reais nowadays is going to be like something, so we're talking about from 40 to 80 US dollars in Fortaleza. And Rio de Janeiro is going to be pretty much the double, right? Like it's going to be double the cost that you would have in Fortaleza, okay? And everything else in general is going to have a substantial difference. Maybe it's not going to be double the cost in Rio de Janeiro, but there is, no denial or no denying that, life in Rio de Janeiro is going to be substantially more expensive than living in the northeast of Brazil, okay? Another example I gave you guys, I think it was, I'm not sure if it was last Wednesday or last Sunday, in Rio de Janeiro, we see transactions, and here is like the record transaction at the company, at the firm. It is 16 million reais, real estate transaction in Rio de Janeiro, okay? The highest we ever had in Fortaleza was 3 million reais, okay, which was a huge stretch. Like, 3 million reais in Fortaleza. Most of the transactions in Fortaleza are under 1 million reais, right? So 3 million reais in Fortaleza was a huge record. And in Rio de Janeiro, we have a 16 million reais transaction as we speak. So you see, like, the dimensions of, cost of living and prices in general is pretty great, right? So you need to pick your choice. If you want to have something more cosmopolitan, it's going to be Rio de Janeiro for sure, right? And if you are, like a more easygoing person and you don't really care about cosmopolitan, you just want to have a good time, something more of a simple life, then we're talking about the Northeast as the perfect choice. All right, the 552, thanks for the response, Mr. Oliveira. I'm looking forward to using your services next year. I'm planning to move to Brazil next year. That's big, the 552. Really nice to know about your plans. Pedro says the property has increased 40%. Very happy. That's great. Good for you, Pedro. Good for you. In 3 years, that's still big, right? Like, that's still big. And I'm just curious, Pedro, are you doing like short-term rentals or are you just keeping the property for yourself? Sharing with the others here, like many people, they are going to do short-term rentals, right? Because if you have someone doing short-term, usually the same property manager handling your short-term, they are also going to help you take care of the property, right? Particularly, like the housekeeping or if something breaks, right? There is always the possibility, particularly for apartments, maybe if you have a leakage from an apartment and, it could be causing trouble to yours. We just had a situation this week, like in Rio de Janeiro. We are actually, we are moving our office to a new, a bigger size office. And, like the new office we got, like it was in a pretty bad shape. And that's why we got this specific office because it was a real a good deal. And but we are basically redoing, like renovating the entire thing. And then once we kind of shut down water in our office, this caused like a problem to another office, right? And not surprisingly, under our office, right? And that's the same thing. Like if you have an apartment, even if you're not using it, there is always the possibility of a problem being caused by another unit. So if you have someone handling the short term, you know what I mean, you can have the same team like handling those things. Yeah. Pedro is complimenting here. I think people overlook smaller cities in Brazil. Brazil is a big country. 200,000 people. It's a nice size, everything you could need or want in a big city with less problems. There you go, Pedro. That's such a good point, Pedro. And let me tell you my story, right? Like, I mean, many of you know, one of my places of choice in Brazil is a tiny city known as Beberibe, right? Beberibe is a 1 hour drive south of Fortaleza. Fortaleza is the capital of Ceará, and the city has potentially 70 to 80,000 people, so a pretty small city. But listen, even though there is some presence of drug dealers in the country, from a safety perspective, I would never feel as safe in Rio de Janeiro or São Paulo, right? Like in Beberibe, it's a type of place like you could, go sleep with your doors unlocked, and it's very rare for you to have news of robbery, of burglaries. There's still like this type of thing, but like in terms of percentage, is like so less than whatever you would see in a big city, right? And in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo, even though most of our clients and participants here in the live stream, they're gonna say, listen, never had any problem in Rio, never had any problem in São Paulo. I think it is undeniable that they are big cities, and big cities usually come with some challenges, right, regarding safety. So sometimes I do see, right, like I mean in São Paulo, I don't know why, not so much in Rio, but in São Paulo, I do see every now and then I see some, like thing related, like someone or, like teenagers breaking into a car to steal the contents, or, very rare, but, every few years I may see someone being robbed at a gunpoint in São Paulo, okay? And I never saw, like, I mean, I've been in Beberibe, Ceará. Like the first time I got to Beberibe was in 2008. No, 2000. Sorry, not 2000. 2018. So it's been like 6 years by now, and I never saw, never had anything stolen, never had a break in. Never saw any news of people being robbed at a gunpoint. So yes, I get, and I completely agree, Pedro. That's where I feel, the safest, like, I mean, in the small cities. But there you go. And I'm from São Paulo, by the way, right? Like, I mean, that's where I spent most of my adult life, in São Paulo. And unfortunately, São Paulo with over 20 million people, right? It does have with, a number of challenges when it comes to safety. No question about it, all right? There you go. Okay, let me see if there are any other topics of interest to our audience as we speak. So we actually spoke about holidays. We had the 2 holidays this week. This past couple of weeks in Brazil, we had the Republic Day. That's when the Republic got, inaugurated in Brazil. That was the first one. That was on the 15th of November. Okay, 15th of November is a major Brazilian holiday. And then we had a second holiday, which was November the 20th, This one is the Black Consciousness Day in Brazil. And then Rio de Janeiro, right? Like Rio de Janeiro is always an outlier when it comes to holidays and, like being more easygoing, not work as much as Sao Paulo. So Rio de Janeiro, Rio de Janeiro's mayor got an additional couple of holidays on the 18th and 19th for no reason other than the G20 being, meeting in Rio de Janeiro, right? So pretty crazy if you think about it. You're going to have like a meeting with, foreign leaders, and you just say, what, like we better shut down everything so they have a good time here in our city, right? Like, I mean, I didn't like it at all, but like our employees, I guess they did, but it was also bad for children who didn't have school. Like I didn't like, I don't think that's how you should run things, but that's my opinion, right? And now the next holidays in Brazil, they're gonna be naturally just Christmas and then New Year's Eve, okay? And but we know that in the United States they're gonna be, a holiday, I guess, on the 28th and the 29th, right, for Thanksgiving. The 27th, usually people, leave earlier their jobs, to prepare, I don't know, the turkey and to prepare like meals for the Thanksgiving. I'm gonna be here as well on the 27th. I remember we have a really, nice member here of our audience. Like she's gonna have a birthday on Wednesday, and I said we're gonna come up with a virtual cake for her. So I'm gonna be here for sure. Okay, it's just like more of a regular week for us, like I was mentioning. Brazilians are not really big in terms of Thanksgiving, even though I do think if you are in a certain society, you should also participate, right? And I hope that Brazilians who live in the United States are going to be at least having some turkey on Thursday. All right, Pedro is complimenting the financing with the developer was a bit different for me as an American. I would recommend financing in the US if possible. The annual interest adjustment with the developer was unfamiliar. Yes, that's a common complaint, Pedro. And even for clients who hire our service, they kind of have this shock, particularly if you're buying a pre-construction. Like they apply a bunch of different ways to, increase the property price. So usually that's a recurring concern. Okay, like how Brazilian developers, they are going to update, the interest rate. But for most purchases, after you get possession of the property, right? In Brazil, we say after you get the keys, usually it's going to be we call it tabela price, or, it's price from I think the creator of this mortgage financing method. But it starts with an amount and it decreases over time, right? So I think it's kind of similar to the fixed rates in the United States. But yes, I mean, not exactly the same approach to mortgage fees. Another perspective, Pedro, you probably have like a Brazilian spouse, but for most U.S. citizens or foreigners in general, it's not easy even to get the finance in Brazil, right? So most of the time, it's not even a matter of comparing rates. It's more a matter of not being able to get the mortgage, and therefore, trying to get a HELOC or, some type of, reverse mortgage or some type of line of credit based on assets you already have in the United States, just getting this pool of money and using in Brazil. Interesting enough, we're going to have a consultation this coming week with a client who just did that. Like he got the line of credit in the US, tried to send to Brazil, and the bank says, no, you cannot do that. The bank said you cannot do that. And now he's going to hire us to assist with the money remittance to Brazil, which is not easy, by the way, right? Like I'm not sure how it was in Pedro's case, but, for most buyers in Brazil, like whenever they say, well, I'm just going to send the money, it doesn't work, okay? Many times it's more of a hit or a miss type of thing when you are by yourself. and we have pretty much every week we're going to have someone coming to the firm just because they got into a real estate transaction and could not accomplish sending the money from the U.S. to Brazil. Those transactions, they are usually pretty easy for us to help here at the firm. Our challenges, they are really when people come from Singapore, okay, from Poland, and other countries in which, for some reason, people are allowed another country, the United Arab Emirates, in which people sometimes they don't file taxes, which is weird to me, right? Or they file taxes with zero income. I don't know how they can accomplish that, but super common for people coming from Singapore, the Arab Emirates, Poland, and other countries. I don't know. There is something with their tax system which they say, listen, I don't know, if you do this, you don't really need to file. But in Brazil, currency exchange banks, they are pretty attached to tax returns, right? So in our case, whenever we have clients from the U.S., they have really nice, juicy tax returns, and therefore very easy for us to help them. Not easy at all for people who come from those countries in which they don't file tax returns, right? Because then it does become an uphill battle, and I don't know how our team is still able, to make this work. We have a really good team for currency exchange. They kind of work with the bank currency exchange back offices. They gather a ton of documents to show that the money is coming from a legit source, and so on. But there you go. So that's pretty much it for today. I want to thank you guys for participating. I want to invite you to go to our YouTube channel right now. Click on Notify Me to participate on Wednesday. I know it's going to be, the day before Thanksgiving, but we're going to be here anyhow. I hope to see you again. And I wish you guys a blessed rest of your Sunday.